Attendance at churches and other places of worship is in decline right across the country, forcing a number of those churches to close their doors. In Montreal, for example, Trinity Memorial closed down in February. It had the capacity to hold 1,000 parishioners, but just before it closed, it was seeing just 50 people turn up for Sunday services. Statistics show church attendance overall is dropping by about 1% year after year. Joining me now with a look at why is David Haskell. He's a sociologist of religion at Wilfrid Laurier University. Thanks for joining me this morning.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.
Okay, so let's talk specifics. Let's talk numbers. How quickly is church attendance declining?
Well, if you look at the data from 10 years ago and ask people, how often do you go to church? And as a sociologist, you want to measure if people are really committed. So we say if somebody goes a couple times a month, then probably that's a pretty sure commitment. And we had 23% 10 years ago, and now you see about 15% that are going on a regular basis.
And so how are the churches dealing with these, the lack of people coming through their doors?
For a lot of them, they're closing, of course. And it's particularly problematic for Catholic churches and mainline Protestant churches. And for those who don't know, the mainline Protestants are the older ones in Canada. They're the United Church, the Presbyterian Church, the Anglican Church, and the Lutheran Church. And they really are hemorrhaging members far more than the other more conservative Protestant churches.
And why do you think that is? Are they just not connecting with people?
Well, actually, some colleagues and I, for the last 5 years, we've been studying this, and our research has just been published at the end of 2016. And what we looked at were growing mainline churches, which were really difficult to find, by the way, but we compared them to the declining, and we were able to isolate some characteristics. And what we found in the growing Protestant churches, they had a more conservative theology. They took the Bible more literally. They weren't completely biblical literalists, but they really took the traditional creeds of the church, the traditions of the church, very seriously. And as a result, it seemed to be one of the keys to growth.
So interesting to, when you think about the younger generations, I mean, when we look at the millennials and younger, for example, what are the churches doing to attract that group of people, and is it working?
For the most part, no. I mean, if you look at other studies that have been conducted in the last 5 or 6 years in Canada, the Catholic Church is losing about 80% of its young people. And these are kids that have been raised in the church, but as they get older, after 18, they just leave. As well as mainline Protestants, they're losing about 80% of their members or more. The only people who seem to be holding their members at about 50% staying are the conservative Protestants. Now, what they're doing, it tends to be that they're, first of all, more focused on them. They've got more programs. But also, I think culturally, they try to be a little bit more culturally similar. That doesn't mean that they're watering down their message in terms of more traditional Christianity. But what they are doing is, culturally, it sounds a lot more like a rock concert at some of their services. Or they're speaking the language of the young people. So they're able to meet the needs of the millennials a little bit more by meeting them culturally where they're at.
Well, it's interesting because you mentioned, they have more programs, but to have more programs, you need more money. And to have more money, I would suspect you need more people in the pews.
Yeah, it's a real chicken and egg, right? I mean, as you get people leaving, you don't have the money to support those other programs. So if you had to look at those churches that were able to do it, they're the ones that are able to sustain their congregation. So how are they sustaining their congregation? Well, they've got a product that seems to be more appealing to people. The bottom line is, if you look at what happens in the marketplace, it really is happening in churches. And you've got this idea of supply and demand. And it seems that there is a demand for religion, at least among some people, but the suppliers aren't meeting that demand.
So why should anyone who's watching right now who is not religious care about this issue?
One of the things that a lot of people overlook is that people who are committed to a religious cause, particularly we have a lot of data on Christian churches here in Canada, they punch above their weight in terms of volunteering and charity. For instance, if you look at the data for people who are regular churchgoers and their charitable givings, they give 3 times the amount of your average Canadian. In terms of volunteering, they give double the hours. So as people become less religious, especially the churchgoers, what you're going to see is less charitable giving and less volunteering. And we've seen that in other Western countries where there's already increased secularism, there's a decrease in altruism.
Interesting. All right, David Haskell, we really do appreciate your time. You're live in Kitchener for us this morning. Thank you.